hello to everybody who is out there in Zoom land watching this. I've been coming, as Karen says, to these Holocaust Education Trust conferences, these ambassador conferences for, my God, 7 years, and now this the 8th. And in one sense, I do it with huge sadness because I'd love to be in a room with you all. I'd love to be mixing with you, chatting, gossiping, getting a sense of the room in a way that I can't do now. But I'm also very proud that we're doing this now. As Karen alluded to, I could be watching the trivia of the Prime Minister being asked about Dominic Cummings at the moment, which I'll go back to, if you'll forgive me, in just a few minutes' time. But this is something I always carve time out of my diary to do because it's very important to me. Now, it's curious because I can't get your reaction. I can't see you. I can't hear you at the moment. But that, in fact, is very similar to my job. Presenting a morning radio program as I do now, very similar to when I used to appear outside Downing Street night after night as the BBC's and ITV's political editor, the job that Laura Kunsberg and Robert Peston do now. Because you've got that very odd thing, which is you're talking to lots of people, and yet you get no reaction at all. People can behave in slightly odd ways. I once interviewed John Prescott, who was Tony Blair's deputy prime minister all those years ago when I first started in the job. And he had a bit of a reputation, Prescott, of getting his words in a bit of a tangle. And I asked him a question once, and he did say to me, he said, "Oh, no," he said, "Nick," it's from Yorkshire, by the way, in case you don't know. He said, "I made that crap. Can we go again?" And I said, "Well, we are in fact live, Deputy Prime Minister, so no, that actually won't be possible. And I'm now live and won't be able to do it again." But I want to begin by saying something with a huge apology if you've been to one of these conferences before. And if you've been to all 7 or 8 of them, you'll know I say it every year. But I say it every year, not because I can't think of anything else to say, but because I think it is absolutely vital to what it is that you're doing and what HET are doing. I always say that you ambassadors shouldn't be referred to as just ladies and gentlemen or you guys or whatever, but we ought to refer to you as your excellencies, because that is what ambassadors are called in the world of diplomacy. And that in many ways you're more important than a mere ambassador, someone who takes a message from a prime minister or a president or a monarch. Because instead of merely carrying a message that maybe matters for a day or a week, or if it's a matter of war, it might matter somewhat more than that, you are carrying a message from the past through the present to the future. You are carrying the most important message of all. You are ambassadors for the people who died in the Holocaust, the people who are survivors from the Holocaust, the people who, like all of us taking part in this conference, are determined that it should never happen again. So when you look at your name badge, if you have one, or if you look at the details from this conference, you look at the backdrop behind the speakers, just remember that word ambassadors means something. It is a huge responsibility, it is a duty, and it is a great power that you have to take this message, not simply about history, not to merely communicate the truth of something that happened, but also to insist that people learn from it, that they listen, that they look, and that they commit, like you, to make sure it never happens again. Now, it's tempting, isn't it, at a time like this to think, really? Can we really talk about anything else? I mean, the globe is going through this extraordinary crisis. People are losing their lives in tens of thousands in this country alone. Maybe we should just talk about the immediate. And in truth, I think that feeling may grow rather than shrink. Even if the health crisis diminishes, I fear that we are all about to live through a grim economic crisis. And I just want to say to many of you who are at school or at college, this will be a really worrying time for you. You're worrying about exams, maybe. You may be worrying about future employment. You may be worrying about all those thoughts you had about what you do at college or at university. And of course, you'll have worries about friends and relatives. You may even, some of you, be grieving for people or worrying about them. And you may think, well, hold on, HET can come later. We don't need to talk about that now. But I want to say to you that it's more important than ever to lift your head, to rise above the immediate, and to think about the big picture. Why is it more important than ever? Because I think the circumstances we're living through now have the potential to create the conditions in which we live through a period of hatred again. We all know, ever since Brexit, the election of Donald Trump, the change in politics in recent years, the anger that we've experienced onto us, we all know that we live in a changed politics. But if you add to that the fear of the foreigner that will now happen, and I think is to some extent happening, as the idea of a foreign virus imported, the anger that will follow, the dislocation that will come as a result of real economic difficulties, where for the first time in 30 years we could have mass unemployment in this country and across the world. The temptation to look for someone to blame will get very big. And you look at the electoral politics in the United States now, you can see it already. We're happily not about to face any election, but if you look back at our recent elections and referendum, you can see it as well. And the key role that the HET has is not, repeat, not to enter that political debate. If you're interested in politics, go do it, yeah? Be a student politician, that's fine. Join a party, be active, get on Twitter, have a row. That isn't HET's job. Don't get down with them, don't wrestle in the mud. The old gag about, if you wrestle with a pig, you get dirty. Don't do that. We don't want you to do that. But what we do want to say is there's something bigger. There's something more profound. There is something to remember at a time when people are tempted to attack one another, to look for someone to blame, to take out the rage they feel that they've been locked down or lost their job or lost their home or maybe seen a loved one die, and to say, this is not the time to blame someone else. This is not the time to look for a group, which may be Jews, as it has been in the past, but it may be any other group. It is not the time to do that, and to draw on the knowledge that you've had as a result of going to Auschwitz or Belsen and taking part in a conference of this sort, drawing on perhaps your own personal experience from listening to Holocaust survivors, drawing maybe even perhaps as I can do on my family experience, to say, look, we know where that ends up. We know what the consequence can be. Just a brief last thought, you see, because at the age you are, many of you in the conference now, I didn't know a huge amount about the Holocaust. My grandparents were, yes, German Jews. They lived on the other side of the world for a long time in Japan. They moved then to Switzerland. It was only when I began to look at the books on shelves a little bit like this and saw the word Holocaust appear that I suddenly realized they had a story to tell, a story they'd never volunteered, a story that was not part of my family life. We never discussed it at home. My mother married someone non-Jewish. It was not part of what she discussed with the children. But when I got my grandparents to tell me the stories about the time my grandmother tried to smuggle all their money out of Nazi Germany, and she had sewn it in to a padded coat hanger, and she was holding it tight in her bag on a train, and the woman next to her made clear that her boyfriend was an officer in the SS, and she referred to her boyfriend as my hot water bottle, the person who keeps her warm. My grandmother knew that if she revealed she was Jewish, if she revealed she was smuggling money, if she revealed that she was heading for the border, that could be it for her, for her husband, for her family. Or the letter that I found a few years back in my mother's box of jumbled possessions, which was a letter sent to my grandfather, who was a doctor, written by one of his patients, who said, I think you'll understand, Dr. Rosenberg, that I can't walk through the front door. So if you don't mind, I'll come in the back in future. What this man was effectively saying was to a Jew who's already the subject of persecution in Berlin, I'm willing to let you try and save my life, to keep me healthy by being my doctor, but I'm not willing to make any stand, even to walk in your front door in order to protect you. And I think it is sometimes those sorts of stories, rather than the horror, the unimaginable horror of what happened in the camps, that are the most powerful and allow you to link some of what we see today with the way people behave to friends and neighbours with the horror of where you end up in a death camp, to make that link between normal human reactions and the horror that became the Holocaust. And the reason I wanted to talk to you today, and the reason I hope to be with you in the flesh, in person, in a year's time, if you'll have me again, is that message is so important that you carry there. That message that says, not, I'm going on Twitter to have a row, not, there is a contest here about two versions of truths, not shouting or screaming at people or picking a fight, quietly, calmly asserting the truth and saying, this is a fact. We know it not just from history books, but we know it from the people who were there. We know it from our family's experience. And we know amidst all the anxiety and the worry that we face in our own world today, we know that's the greatest horror that we've seen on our planet for hundreds of years. And we today, at this conference and in the work we all do, all come together to say, never, ever again.